Hey everyone, FPS Chazla here, and today we're doing the book club for The Silent War by John Pina Craven. And almost by chance, this book club just about fell. It was originally scheduled for yesterday, February 11th, but then just on happenstance, I looked up John Pina Craven and found out he passed away on January 12th, 2015. So I thought I'd push it off to today to honor his memory. So that's what we're doing here today. And we're discussing his book, The Silent War, which was an amazing read for me to get an inside look of the chief scientist of the Navy, just all the stuff he was involved in. It's almost surreal. But we got me here, we got Edds, we got Ghost Dog, and we got Tamburello. Hey everyone.
Hey,
Hey,
oh,
oh, oh,
I guess we can just jump right in. Something I noticed a lot in the book was how much Rickover was mentioned, and I guess that's not something that could have been not done. If that, let me rephrase it. Rickover had to be in this book, just in what John Craven was involved in as chief scientist of the Navy, being so involved with the submarines and Polaris and nuclear submarines, which was Rickover's baby. And Rickover, this book was almost half about Rickover, which I found very
right.
interesting.
Yeah, but one thing I found very interesting right off the bat is, when everything looked good, Rickover was always in the forefront, but when things started to go south, it was left to the subordinates and other people to answer for it.
Yeah,
Didn't never
yeah,
wanted his name attached to failure.
yeah. I found that very interesting, and that yeah, he chose when he wanted to show up, which
Yeah,
which
and
yeah, which
I'm surprised that he was allowed to get away with that. He did not make more enemies than he did. I mean, I know he wasn't well liked, or I should say he was well feared and respected, but I'm surprised he was able to allow to get away with that and maintain the status that he did, because that kind of seems kind of right off the bat, that seems kind of chintzy to me.
it does.
You know,
I based on how much of a hard ass he was, I would have almost expected him. It's almost the behavior I did not expect from him. I would have expected him to be
exactly.
present everywhere.
I think the,
Anyone
th-
else?
the thing to bear in mind is that a lot of the stuff with Rick over there. I mean, obviously, we're only going to really ever hear Craven's side of it. It's his narrative, but I would agree with that. I mean, it's not something I would expect that from most people of rank, like Rickovers. I mean, he is only ever going to be associated with the stuff he wants to be associated with. He's got that kind of character, that kind of personality about him. So Craven, is, of course, is going to be dealing with a lot of this stuff in the background, whether Rickover wants him to or not. And I think that actually sometimes worked against Craven sometimes.
Yeah. Well, um, I think both men. Um, I think he illustrates the struggles uh, that a scientist like him would have going against the Navy structure as it was, at least back then. Um, and when able to at least get a lot of these things done, being the forefront. I give the man a lot of credit. I didn't know a lot about him until and I'm interested in disclosure to the club. I didn't. I'm not still, but about halfway through it. So I still have yet to read and learn. But I'm already fascinated by the man, and I had no idea about him whatsoever.
Very fascinating rise to grace, if you will. It seems like everyone's story at some point is just fascinating in how they got to where they were, and that may be a consequence of looking back on something with a fatalistic view.
Um, and I had my whole where I'm at with it, about with the Nautilus. That's the big story so far, the big impression that I've gotten from the book. Um, I had no idea. I knew somebody personally that was on the Nautilus, or his father, and I wish now I would have gotten. You know, I my interest now would be where it is now, or my interest then where it was now, because I would have really just bent his ear about stories. Um, but I
Yeah,
never heard anything like this. And I heard a lot of stories, even just from you know cursory from his son, and never nothing like. I mean, the way the boat was always depicted, it was always glorious. Um, so to hear that it had the problems that it did, and Craven here develop, the instrument or monitor the instrumentation, to figure all this out. Amazing. Again, stunning.
I think as well, what I found absolutely fascinating is kind of how the Navy worked before SubSafe and all that sort of stuff worked. I mean, they literally were wanting, like, the Navy just did not want to pay for these refurbishments, even though they were clearly necessary. It's just, that blew me away.
Yeah, it was almost like before SubSafe, it was kind of like a confederation of a bunch of different players, all trying to avoid responsibility. I know they mentioned like the Navy and electric boat, and no one wanted to touch it or whatever. It feels like the creation of SubSafe was basically just like an extension of Rickover, just like one central authority that basically everyone has to answer to.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Again, I need to read more to learn more. But so far, from what I see, people like Craven, what would the Navy be without these guys? And like he says, he's from battleships, right? And to see him, be in the forefront, at least with Polaris, very impressive. I wish I had another week. Because,
I guess we should probably preface this to you, Ben, and say, hey, you're going to have some spoilers here if you're in the club.
No, it's okay, because I wanted to participate anyway, because I think I'm far enough along where I'm getting a good sense. But I'm just now getting to the point where Chazzy was saying he can see the big influences of Rickover, and I was like, okay, I was just starting to sense that where I'm at, that Rickover here is going to play a big central role in this book. So
yeah,
that's actually, I think, one of the main points I wanted to open up first with was Rickover. Would the U.S. Navy have been what it had been, or what it is, without Rickover, or at least the submarine part? Like, would we have gotten to that eventually, or would there have been as much safety and success, or would the U.S. Navy have, in its submarine respect, more reflected the Soviets, where you got quantity over quality and not particularly safe subs at first at the get go?
A bit of both, maybe. A bit of all that.
I think, to be perfectly honest, what Rickover did was he pushed the nuclear navy. He really wanted a nuclear navy. He thought it was far too much of the thing. I think what you'd have had without someone like Rickover to really push that is a much more longer term, much more protracted development with diesel electrics. I think there would have been far more technology development in that direction before nuclear stuff started happening. I think I don't think necessarily the safety would have been better. I think Rickover pushed to really rush through the nuclear stuff. I don't think it was all thought through as well as it would have been. But at the same time, I think the quality of the crew inside a nuclear submarine wouldn't have been good, because you've got to bear in mind it back at that point, when this is first generation nuclear, Rickover handpicked every member of staff on the boat.
Yep.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
For the first generation of nuke subs, it's a good thing, because if you can't pass muster to Rickover's standard, then he has not deemed you smart enough or clever enough or worthy of being a nuclear submariner. And I think that, until SubSafe came along, really helped minimize potential casualties.
Yeah, a lot of careers were, you ran afoul of Rickover, and a lot of careers were,
they were in the toilet.
Did unceremoniously, because maybe you didn't say the right thing or give the right answer, or, I don't know. I've heard both sides of the Rickover argument. He's kind of like the Curtis LeMay of the United States Navy.
He's he's like the example of what, I guess. Let me try and word this out as I say it, of what a good authoritarian type can do. Like, he's kind of like the example of that.
Yeah.
You take the good with the bad for it, but yeah.
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 I don't know if you got this far, Ben, but on page 185, I think, to jump ahead, but it regards to Rickover. In my notes, I have it written down that Rickover almost didn't make it, and I had that listed in the first paragraph here. Um, so as what goes with almost all military, if you come to promotion time and you don't get promoted, you're pretty much out, basically. And that just about happened to Rickover. But I believe he got the ability to sidestep and go into machinery or something like that. He went into engineering, sidestepped his way from going up to like a flag admiral, the traditional route or something.
Yeah, from what I understand, it was looking like he was going to. I can't remember the exact passage. I'm just going off of memory, but from what I understand, it looked like he was going to get thrown into a minesweeper. Because he wasn't a West Point guy he wasn't one of the guys out of the Ivy Leagues. So a lot of those guys, the ring knockers, basically said, no, you're going to just go into minesweepers. And instead, what they did is they threw him into like some scientific engineering department. Basically, they wanted to take all any chance he had of a command away from him. And it can be argued then that what Rickover did is he turned around and says, well, we're going to take this experimental nuclear technology and I'm going to build a fleet around it, and I will have my fleet that way.
Yeah, I found a sentence here where Craven's talking about his military academies were all engineering duty officers, and most were graduates of the academy. This is on page 185 at the beginning of the first paragraph. Their version of... Sorry, what was that?
No, I'm sorry. With what I'm reading off here, I don't have pages. I have percentages and hours and minutes left of the book. So.
Oh, that's interesting. So this is 185 out of 290. Let me run that number for you real quickly.
I have no idea. All I know is I have 6 hours and 53 minutes left.
Try 63 to 64% if you want to see the passage.
Oh my God. Jesus Christ, dude. Holy, that's a lot of flipping. Hold on.
Yeah, or I can just read it to you. It's whatever.
No, go ahead. Read it to me. Go ahead.
Okay.
Just read.
So Craven's military colleagues, who were all engineering duty officers, and most were graduates of the academy, their version of the Rickover story was that of a young, non-team player who had entered the academy with grandiose dreams and a disdain for the hijinks of his fellow midshipmen. It was said that he would put the plebes on report for the most minor infraction, and of course he was quickly alienated from his classmates, becoming the target of hazing and ridicule.
Ooh. 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 Ooh.
And he continued to make enemies.
Well, all through his career, that's the thing, and that's the knock on dude is, most people say he probably could have got a lot more done had he, go along to get along a little bit instead of being the hard ass and, knuckle dragger that he was. I mean, I've seen footage of him, talking to congressmen, and anybody that he talked to, he berated them. I come from military. My dad was Navy, and I know Rickover is a legend, but I don't know. Some people say his methods were unsound, but look what he got done.
He's the epitome of the ends justify the means.
Right, exactly. And I'm torn. I'm kind of torn because I've heard both sides of it. And
I don't think as a people person he was a very good leader, but as getting the effect from the political the standpoint, getting the result, yeah, exactly.
Results,
like I said, he's very much results oriented. If the job's done, then he's fine.
Could have done without a lot of the histrionics. Could have done without a lot of the I mean, I don't know. I guess our history is littered with these type of people: Patton, LeMay, McNamara, I suppose. I don't know. I'm surprised.
Yeah, people that by any other definition of the word are complete assholes, but because of the position in the office they hold and the influence that they grab, they turn their position into something somewhat useful.
Like Craven, remember Craven? He disappointed his father. He was supposed to be, a long line of Craven military officers, and he flunked out of the academy twice. I think it was. Memory serves me correctly.
I read that he had an incident with a boat that he was in command of, where he basically ran it aground, and then that was it. No more commands for you.
Got in a fight. Guy was a hard ass. I wanted to go back and look at the interview online with him. I haven't got a chance to do that with I know there's some interviews online. take this opportunity to learn a little bit more about him. There's a couple guys I want to learn a little bit more. He's one of them. So maybe there'll be an adulum. I'll put in an adulum at the end of the week. Say, okay, I'm ready. But anyway, continue.
Yeah, on page 190, Craven also notes how Rickover was very conservative in his design philosophy. For example, talking about, I believe the DSRV, they may have been talking about NR1 at this point. Rickover wanted all the external items of this boat to be tested at a pressure of 20,000 feet and should be cycled 15,000 times at that depth to simulate a 40-year life. Not to say that is very conservative is a gross understatement. That is an insane design requirement right there.
Yeah, there was a passage there. I can't remember exactly how it went, but basically he talks about the radiator test, and if someone comes into his office with technology, he just would throw it out a 3-story building and see if it's still alive. If it was still alive at the end of it, if it was, then he was interested. And if it wasn't, well, it's not good enough for the military.
Yeah, I think the way it went is he would ask the people who brought him a component if it would survive the radiator test. And I think it would go either one of two ways. They would say they don't know what that test is, or they would say it would pass it, and then he would take it and smash it against the radiator until it broke. and then the other version of that was he would drop it out of a 3-story window.
He was involved in Craven was a lot in a lot of deep sea stuff, and I don't know since I haven't gotten as far as Chazzy, you finished it, but as far as
the book does talk about everything that he is publicly available to talk about.
Yeah. Even if something's like super classified, I think he at least tries to mention it in passing to some extent.
Yeah, it felt a little bit like a confession in some places. Like he would talk about stuff that he wasn't sure if he should talk about or not, but he would talk about the stuff that's on public record at least, and let the reader kind of infer what they wanted to from the rest of it.
Yeah.
Where I'm kind of at now, he's talking about getting this recovered submarine, the S-51.
Ah, yes.
And it's just like, wow, and Chazzy was bringing the DSRV, so it's like I'm kind of getting the sense that okay, this guy,
he had his fingers in many, many pies.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. One of the quotes I enjoyed of his the most in the book was saying that every cover up needs a true cover story, and it amazed me to find out that the DSRV was basically a cover for Trieste and NR1.
Yeah.
I'd never known that coming into this. That was amazing to find out.
When was this book published?
This was published in, I want to say 2005.
Copyright 2001, first Touchstone edition 2002. So most of the stuff in this book is now coming up for over 10 years old. And that would have been at the time it was published. He's probably been writing it over sort of 4 or 5 years prior to that. So there's a lot of stuff that was just recently released back then, sort of late 90s under the Freedom of Information Act and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, Cold War had been over for almost a decade when he started writing this.
Yeah, like what you're saying, but Trieste had very little operational capability, and modification of the boat would have been more expensive than new construction. So new it would be. It was thus decided that we would build a brand new bathyscaphe, but we would build it in absolute secrecy. The facility itself was secret and called the parlance of the intelligence community skunk works. It's just what you're talking about right here. When you said it, I'm like, oh, I just passed that.
Yeah, there you go.
So there you go, right there.
Yeah, there's an interesting bit about that first Trieste. I think it basically like quote unquote failed when they were like at depth, but like it didn't like blow up, but like something failed in such a way that it became stronger, but then they couldn't use it after that. And that was like one of those like oh shit moments, like very close to like dying.
Yeah, right, I remember something about like seemingly it went to depth and it got crushed into a certain position.
Yeah.
And because of the way it crushed, it actually became momentarily stronger. But obviously, as soon as pressure was relieved, i.e., when it went back up to depth, then it would have started to fail. It's just elastic stress.
Yeah, it was nuts.
You'd never catch my ass in one of those.
Yeah.
Side note.
The thing is if you can imagine that, you're like 20,000 feet under the water, and all of a sudden you hear the sphere that you're sitting in just going thump, bump, and your sphere is starting to look more and more like a tiny cube. I mean, that's not good.
So that's about where I'm at, right? When you said that, I was like, oh.
Okay, well, that's good for reference for you.
Yeah, well, now it's like, okay, I'll sign off now, so you don't ruin it.
There's still a lot of earlier stuff to talk about.
No, I got it.
So I want to bring it around to his involvement in Polaris and deterrence and his views on deterrence.
I love that. That was amazing.
His views on deterrence were interesting to me, just in the fact that he only wanted, the biggest of the baddest strategic weapons to be a deterrent. He didn't want any kind of tactical weapons that could actually have a greater likelihood of being used.
Well, I can understand where he's coming from there, because the theory behind what he's talking about is if you have tactical weapons will progress to strategic weapons. And if you think about it, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, one of the major things for, in the event of a Soviet attack was it was expected there'd be chemical, biological, and small tactical weapons to quote unquote soften up the forward line. And the only way you could really counter that as NATO would be to use your own tactical nukes. And if you do that, then what's going to happen happening is you're going to end up having to escalate that by getting the submarine launched missiles and the other stuff launched at bases from way behind the lines, and that's when it goes strategic, right? So I can understand where they're coming from on that line. I don't believe it is possible at all to start a nuclear attack and not have it escalate.
Yeah, no, I don't. It's hard for me to envision a tactical nuclear strike staying tactical, or a tactical exchange rather. But I found it very interesting that I forget his name now, but the guy who made the hydrogen bomb,
Teller.
Edward Teller,
who Craven contrasts himself with, was a huge proponent of all the small tactical stuff. And I think that may have been to do with the fact that he thought the world was going to end anyway soon. Whereas seemed like, yeah.
I mean, Craven's version of portrayal of him is that he's utterly convinced that there'll be a huge tactical nuclear war within 5 years.
Yeah, every 5 years. Yeah.
that exact quote is actually something I found in a documentary about the first nuclear submarines as well. I found it on YouTube, and I found it quite funny that the same quotes I found in the book as well. And yeah, the exchanges with Teller and Teller's view is quite chilling, to be honest, because he was just pushing forward for complete annihilation and just get ready to completely nuke the Soviets off the planet, while the rest of the team and people were trying to prevent that exact thing from happening.
Yeah. Teller's view was the world's going to end anyway. Might as well go out with a bang.
Might as well take the Reds with us,
Yeah, and then Craven's view was if any nuclear weapon is used, deterrence has failed. So it's just interesting to see those views on deterrence. The fact that there are two very different sides to it, because to the casual observer, it all kind of seems silly. But
I think what would be more chilling is the fact that if you think about it, if Teller and Craven were working in the same department at the same time, which they must have been, they must have been kind of working together during the Polaris stuff, and they must have been in consultation with one another. You imagine what would have happened if Teller had become the chief scientist?
Wow.
And talking about this the other way around. Because he must have been considered for the position.
Yeah, I thought I noted a quote about that with the who was the guy that appointed Craven the chief scientist? He just called him right away or whatever about it.
Admiral Reborn or something like that. Can't remember.
Reborn.
I can't remember I can't be sure of the pronunciation, but I'm pretty sure that's who he was.
I normally it would be Rayburn, but there was none of that, so I just said Rubburn.
Yeah, on that note, I think. Well, okay, so we're talking chief scientist of the Navy. So for that, in that regard, I don't know if Teller would have been up for the job because he was strictly a physicist or something. Well,
technically speaking, Craven wasn't really up for the job because he wasn't even in the Navy at the time.
That's true, but he was Navy at one point.
Reborn pulled strings to give him the position. I love that line that he said. It's "Oh, sir, I'm not authorized, or I don't have the security clearance to be as chief scientist." And William just "Are you going to tell me who I can and cannot hire?"
Yeah, no, sir.
No, sir. Great, turn up. You're hired.
Admiral William F. Raburn. Raburn. I don't know.
Yeah, it's Raborne. So oh no, not drop E.
No E. No E.
Yeah.
No E.
So I have no idea how that's properly pronounced, and I'll forget I'll plead to my ignorance.
Let me try and. I can't remember the name exactly. Is it just Raborn?
Yeah, I remember an Admiral something at Red Raborn, like his nickname was Red.
Okay, I think I would just say it. To me, I think I would say it as Rayborn, but
Okay.
So that's the thing. I'm from Scotland instead of America, so pronunciation on some of these names can be different from country to country. And given that you're from America, I'll go by your opinion on that.
yeah, I honestly have no idea, but I would say Rayborn unless
But that's who we're talking about.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So he's the one that decides that Craven should get the job, but I think what was most telling there is that there were 3 other guys who were offered the position and politely declined.
Right.
So obviously, either Craven had no idea what he was getting into, or he had some sort of impression of duty or loyalty to take the position.
Well, didn't he say that? I thought it was that. I thought it was the last.
Yeah, he had like a little internal dialogue going on in that part. It's like he was like, well, who is actually ever qualified to be chief scientist or whatever? And then they kind of like convinced himself like, all right, I guess I'll do this.
It's like, I'll give it a shot,
Yeah, I don't remember which page that's on.
That was very early on. I think that's like in the first chapters, getting to know you chapters.
But yeah, I mean, the Polaris missile program was, I mean, at the time it was almost as infamous. If you want a common corollary at the moment in terms of, oh my god, what a waste of money this is, oh my god, this is never going to work. Probably the F-35 program at the moment, which is being widely derided as an expensive method and all that sort of stuff. The Polaris missile would be right up there with public opinion on submarine launched missiles.
Well, like I said, I'm at the accelerated Evelyn Wood rate right now reading this book, but which now I guess I can slow down and really enjoy it. But
yeah, go for it.
Weren't they saying that the first studies that launching a ballistic missile out of a submarine would lead to disaster or something like that? Did I read that right?
Basically what they were trying to say is that, oh no, you can't do that. It's not physically possible.
Right.
You're going to cause problems with the submarine. We can't launch it out the submarine because the gases and the propellants would be toxic to the crew. There's all kinds of problems, and then basically, as far as I can tell, the development cycle came along to the kind of plan of going, gosh, you're right, liquid-filled propellants would be hella dangerous on a naval vessel of any description, let alone a submarine.
Yeah,
And Craven and company comes along and goes, well, what about a solid propellant?
Yeah, and then there was an interesting. It amazes me how quick the actual technical decisions are made, and I kind of get that in my field a little bit too. Like the technical basis for design is resolved rather quickly, but it's actually evaluating it and doing all the analyses that takes a lot of time.
Analysis, deliberated cost analysis, all that kind of stuff. They do that. It's a business. Yeah.
Well, that kind of reminds me actually of one of the Rickover quotes when they're like, okay, we need to make the NR1. Okay, how much do we have? Oh, we have about 40 million or $40 billion in change here, and I can get $10 billion of change from here. So what should we say? We'll tell them it's going to cost $50 billion.
Yeah.
So they basically made the NR1 on the back of a napkin, drew up the specifications, and had it presented within a week or something like that. I can't remember the exact timeline, but ridiculously quick.
Yep.
And that kind of speaks to the ability of these two guys to get their heads together and just make decisions.
A quote that I wrote down that was interesting, I thought here. It says, Academy trained naval officers had to learn from tradition and experience that the enemy initiates countermeasures to any military system at the moment that system's birth.
Yes, I remember this one. Yeah.
And then you got it. Then you got to make the counter. Then you got to do the countermeasures right away to that too.
Yeah. The only way to avoid cycles of victory and defeat is to launch a countermeasure system at the same moment that the original system is first deployed. I thought that was killer, dude.
Yeah,
Like,
that's nuts.
wow.
You need to
wow.
immediately invent the replacement as soon as you've invented the start the first one.
Talk
Yeah,
The
about
thing
yeah.
is, that's not a very popular opinion these days because that means you're constantly doing research and development.
Well, it's just you're constantly spending money too. I mean, think about
Exactly,
the money.
right.
You know, you're having to run a counter program. You know, I mean, that's
Well, yeah,
just
and these days there isn't. These
There's
days
not
there
the money.
isn't the same. There isn't like a Soviet Union clear threat to be doing that kind of intense R&D cycle on continuously.
Yeah, it was definitely a different time for that then.
but you know, it goes to show you, you know, um, what you know back then, you know, money, you know,
Money wasn't a factor then.
yeah, it wasn't, there was no factor with money.
No.
And you know, some would say that, you know, some would say that it's still that way today. That's why your defense budget is secret. You don't know how much they're really spending on it, you know, and God knows how much they're spending. And
It's nowhere near what they're getting now, what they got back, even if you adjust for inflation.
wow, okay,
I would say you generally know what they're spending, you just don't know where the money's going to.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, the fact of the matter is that with very little work, if you live in America, you can go into Freedom of Information Act, or you can just pay attention to the Senate notes, and you will see the budgetary appointments. That all has to be approved by the Senate and by the committee. If you can correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure all that shit has to be done by Congress. It all has to be approved.
yeah, but some of
right?
that stuff is like under secret appropriation.
I'm not saying it's. I'm not saying you're going to know the exact amount that this program and this program and this program is going to you
No,
Yeah,
you're not.
But
Yeah,
what you will know is
but-
that the Navy is getting this much this year, and the Air Force is getting this much this year, and so on and so on, and then the Pentagon is getting this much every year.
I don't think so. I don't think you even. I don't think. I wouldn't even subscribe to that statement. I'm not trying to get off in the weeds here, but I don't think you can even say that.
I would say every dollar has to be accounted for or in the original budget, but that doesn't mean you know where it actually ends up.
That's what I
Right.
was meaning at. Yeah, like Congress will sign off on a budget, a Department of Defense budget from the Pentagon, and the Pentagon then will turn around and say, okay, well, we're going to give this much to the Navy, we're going to give this much to the Air Force, and so on. And obviously, there's going to be strings attached, and there's political shit going on in the background there. That's just how it is.
They're not going to tell you how much money they're sending to Area 51. They're just that's not even in the budget to fund
Exactly.
Area 51. A site that they're not even going to acknowledge the existence. They're not even going to acknowledge that they're paying for it. You know what I'm saying?
Right on. Yeah. No, totally.
Yeah.
What I was
the
getting
yeah.
at though is that you're going to, with a bit of sensibility and some Freedom of Information Act stuff, you're going to say, okay, well, last year, the U.S. Navy got this much, and they spent, and with a bit of intelligent input, you can go, okay, well, what are they doing with their sudden influx of money? They're now buying a lot of new aircraft, right? So we can assume that a large portion of the budget's been tied up to that, because otherwise they would have been able to do that last year.
And this all ties in back. This actually does tie into the book because I think for the DSRV, some senator gave him the award for like the largest, amazingly huge overspending for it because most of the money was actually going towards like Trieste and NR1.
Yeah, this is something that happens a lot of the time. Like you get a public budget you get a public item, and then you hear about how things are being over budget. That stuff's not over budget. Those beans were accounted for a long time ago. That money's going somewhere else.
Yeah, now that I've read this book, I know over budget is a keyword for perhaps something clandestine.
Definitely something clandestine. Compare that with the F-35 program. If you mean to tell me that amount of gross over expenditure was just spent on the F-35, I very highly.
I find it quite interesting that they had the press in on certain subjects to try and push Congress to fund specific items like the B-1 bomber. There's a bit in just shortly into chapter 5 where he's given a speech, and the Washington Post pretty much just nails him on his head because he's saying that the missile's not going to be ready in time, and they're ridiculing him, and he goes back and he goes to talk with the admiral, and the admiral basically just says like, well, the editorial's pretty much written before you even gave the speech. It's just an effort to impress Congress that America's missiles are not going to be ready. and there's a bomber gap, and we need more bombers.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
This is
Yeah,
all politics. This is nothing to do with reporting what's being said or anything.
Oh,
It's just all
totally.
about the money and about the stuff.
Oh, totally. Absolutely. There's many times where this sort of stuff's already been reported upon, and the press is largely written, and all they're really waiting for you to do is say something really insane so that they can really back it up.
Yeah, okay, so I found it said it was part of a campaign of the Air Force's program to develop the B-1 bomber. So it was like the branches fighting each other in the news, basically, or whatever.
Oh, that inter-service rivalry ain't ever going to stop, because they both services both fundamentally believe that what they're doing is better and more important than the others,
Mm-hmm.
and that's because they care about the country. That's understandable.
It is, yeah.
But in line with that, it doesn't always work. I mean, the fact of the matter is there's nothing wrong if you've got the budget for it with a sort of a tri-service nuclear deterrent. If you've decided politically that you need to have a nuclear deterrent, there is no reason at all why you can't have a tri-service nuclear deterrent. But of course, the moment you do that, every other service is going to say that they should be the only ones with the nuke.
Mm-hmm. On that same page, I just thumbed over a quick quote that I enjoyed a lot. It's on page 72. It starts in the second paragraph, and he's talking about Polaris test program. It said the first 7 missiles were launched from Cape Canaveral, and all had failed and been witnessed by the press. And then it runs down to, I think Levering Smith's quote is like, "Why do you think we're conducting a test program?" It's like, it's to find the problems now before they appear in the field, and I just love that so much.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people don't understand why these missiles blow up all the time, and that's because, well, it's rocket science. They need to find this stuff now.
That kind of ties me around to F-35, like people talking about, oh, these tests are always a failure. It's like, well, you test it now so that it works later when you actually build the thing.
Yeah, totally.
I'm still thinking kind of about Edward Teller. Sorry, and
yeah, he's
thinking, but I'm just thinking, here he is, a madman of death, but then you have Oppenheimer, a counterpart who went probably half crazy thinking about the nuclear genie that he unleashed.
Mm-hmm.
You think about the contrast of two men, unbelievable.
Yeah, the Ed Teller stuff was very.
There was a section I can't remember where it is, but there's a section where where basically Craven infers from his location and who he could possibly be speaking onto the phone that he's talking to the President of the United States, and he's in a panic saying, "No, you must do this. You must do this. How can you say this? How can you be like this? We're going to be at war with the communists in 5 years."
Here it is,
and he's clearly in a panic about something.
When Edward Teller, an advocate of tactical nuclear warfare, foretold in 1955 of coming of lighter and more powerful nuclear bombs.
He wasn't I don't think he was just an advocate of tactical nuclear weapons. He was talking about just, we're going to have a nuclear exchange. We better just prepare for the hard train.
Well,
make sure we make as many nukes as possible so that we kill more of the Russians before they kill us all.
Yeah, he said it was inevitable. He said that nuclear exchange with the Russians is inevitable. And then in today's climate, I'm like, oh, gee.
Yeah, I mean, his own arguments are almost kind of self-defeating. It's like, well, if it's inevitable and they're going to blow each other to smithereens, and it's like, it's a tricky world. It's a world full of paradoxes and stuff like that and everything. A world of deterrence.
Yeah, I like how he has to get Teller's attention, and he just starts this story about glass on the water, and when it's under pressure, it's super strong. And he gets Teller all worked up about some glass submarine or some shit. I was like, dude, there's no way you could get it done. And he's being shoved off to that back room to draw up like a scheme. He's like, it's going to take 15 years. And he gets all worked up. Like, you don't understand. We're going to have a nuclear war in 5 years.
Yeah, that I remember that now because I did want to go over that quote just because I'm an engineer nerd, and the fact that glass cannot fail in compression I find terribly interesting. But they were talking about like building like glass submarine bubble things at the bottom of the ocean that would have ballistic missiles in them that could never be like sensibly destroyed or whatever.
I mean, I can understand the logic behind it. I don't understand. I'm not going to pretend to understand the mechanics of glass under pressure. Okay, I'm not going to pretend to understand that. That's for someone else better qualified than me. But assuming that what Craven says is true about the properties of glass, and assuming that what he says is true, it makes a lot of sense to have your nuclear silos underneath the continental shelf, because you've got 2,000 plus feet of water for which the missiles that an enemy missile has to penetrate through, as well as the rock that it's sitting under.
Mm-hmm.
If it was at all technically feasible to supply and maintain a missile silo under there, it's a perfect hiding hole, because you cannot detect a missile launch until it's way out of the water.
Yeah, it's feasible in the first respect until you realize the thing has to be serviced and accessed at some point, and then it becomes.
Well, that's what I was getting at, and obviously, I think that brings us around to one of the other nice things that I didn't actually know anything about until I read about it here, which was the Sequest, the Sea Labs.
Oh, close my ears. Close my ears. Don't talk to me. I'm more interested about this underwater launching. I must have missed that.
Yeah, let me find the page. Page 82.
I don't know if it's been mentioned in the book where you are yet, Ben, but basically the short brass tacks of it is that Taylor and Craven are still somewhat in contact with one another, and because at the time I think Taylor has the ear of the president, or he has the ear of someone way up the food chain, and Taylor's presenting ideas to the cabinet, and obviously Craven is Taylor's go-to guy to say, okay, can we actually do this? Is this something we could do? And how soon would it take? What would it cost? That's the sort of thing that Craven has to answer for Taylor. And Craven goes, yeah, here's what we can do. Here's how it's going to work. And here's the timelines and the costs. And Taylor was like, is there no way that can be done quicker? And Craven's like, absolutely not. This is the development cycle. This is what you're going to need. This is as fast as we can get it. With the funding you're trying to allocate to me. And
to use percentages, Ben, it should be probably around like 29 or 28%, 30% through the book. It's in the chapter War and Peace, Some Like It Hot.
Okay, yeah, I just passed through that probably a little too quickly here.
Yeah, you might have glossed through that because it's not exactly the most entertaining thing on the side of things.
I'm already seeing right now. I think I'm going to go back a little bit here to about chapter 7, about to fail safe and start over, because this is when I really started to depress. I was like,
Yeah. And to be fair, I've read the book a couple of times now, and there's things that I miss. I've realized I'd missed after the first reading. So
we were talking about this early on, and I guess this is a good time to bring this up. I found the book, so far kind of difficult to read, kind of uneven. And I've read a lot of books, and Chazzy spoke to his scientific nature, and that may well be, but for the layman, it's kind of difficult. And I shouldn't say difficult. I keep in mind, I've seen the guy in interviews, and when I'm reading the book, I'm reading it as if I'm watching an interview of him.
Right.
And maybe that may be the wrong way to do it, but
I certainly hadn't ever seen any of his interviews before I'd read the book the first time. I have seen some since. I know where you're coming from.
I almost wish I could sit and listen to him read this to me, because it would be the way it's written is the way he speaks.
Yes.
I could see that right away. I mean,
is there got any examples of passages that were particularly difficult or anything like that? Because as Ben did bring this up, I really didn't have much of a problem reading it, and I am curious to know if it's because of my technical writing, engineering background or something like that, and it's just the way he's going to be.
Let me speak to this. It could be. It also could be because I felt pressed, not on my own. I wanted to get it done, so I could have. Now that I'm not pressed. I'm basically, I feel good enough where I know enough about it where I can sit here and speak to it, but I haven't read it all. I'll be honest about it. I should say I'm getting a sense of it from where I'm at right now.
Right.
But I'm going to go back. I think I'm going to go back. And Chazzy, it'll probably be one of them things be like, ooh, dude. I found it, I guess let me amend that until but it is, sometimes I found it like it's he's technical. I mean, he's a scientist, he's a smart man,
Mm-hmm.
Smart guy.
smart man, and he's dealing with some extremely advanced concepts. I think for what it's worth, he does a really good job of explaining things that he doesn't seem at times very sure that he should be discussing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, he's
Right.
trying to dance around classification issues and stuff like
Yeah.
that.
I kind of know how that is. I get it. I mean,
There's times where
About that.
where it reads like he's maybe a little uncomfortable with what he's talking about,
he
but
even goes
he's
out of his
kind
way
of
to say
got
it.
consultant and advice that it's okay to talk about it. Although obviously, 50, 60 years of being in very highly classified parts of the Navy, he's obviously just not entirely comfortable in his own skin that maybe what he's talking about is okay.
Well, Chazzy asked me, if was there a certain passage, and yeah, there was one. I just can't find it right now, where he basically he's trying to explain something, and then he goes about saying, "Well, I'm trying to explain something to you, basically, but I'm trying to avoid explaining it to you, basically."
Yeah, no, I know that. I think I know the passage you're meaning. There's a bit where he talks about it's like after it's when this is when he kind of explains about why he decided to write the book, because he's reacting or responding to another book called Blind Man's Bluff, which if you haven't read it is interesting.
I
But
remember that's early on. I think that's in the prologue or the beginning or wherever that is. No, it's not. I
Yeah.
know what you're talking about.
and,
No,
and basically what he tries to explain is that he's not going to say yes, absolutely all of these things are true, but he's going to give you his side of things, and he's going to leave it up to the reader to decide what's true and what's not.
I understand that. But the way he's trying to explain a situation, but he goes at length to say, "I'm trying to explain something to you that I'm really not supposed to explain something to you." So he's being very bland, but
Yeah,
it
there's
doesn't
a
really.
lot of I think I can remember the passage you're talking about, and he's talking about there's a lot of this. That subject X may or may not have happened, and if it did happen, then this is what might or might not have happened, and so on and so on. It gets really complicated very quickly to follow.
Complicates it. Chazzy's sitting in front of his whiteboard now because he was explaining something about Nautilus that I just couldn't visualize in my mind what he was talking about with the structure.
Yeah, we need to remember to get to that.
Whatever. What do you want to do? I'll just.
Okay.
Anyway.
So we've been discussing some like overarching themes of the book, but then this book also has very random tidbits about very random batshit crazy technologies.
Yeah.
One of them that's very it's like 3 pages before the glass sphere stuff is this nuclear cruise missile that would be flying around. It would be leaving a swath of 200 to 300 rads of radiation behind it, which is absolutely insanely high radiation. That is nuts.
Yeah, like a mile wide as well. There's like this massive swath of just radioactivity.
Yeah, this thing was basically batshit crazy. I think with his rough calcs, he said proceeding at Mach 3.2, or about 1,800 miles per hour. That meant it would contaminate 1,800 square miles of land per hour with a dose of radiation lethal to all living things. Second, at the end of its mission, it could not be recalled to a land base, but would have to be jettisoned over the ocean, there to spew its rads for 50,000 years or more. It's just like, Jesus Christ.
And then he's been called up to look at the weapon, and he's, as chief scientist, he's supposed to come to this test fire, and he's just really hoping it blows up or something goes wrong, so he can just like put it on the short list and get it done with, and it's a complete success, and he's like, oh shit.
And then it became a victim of its own technology. It was too slow. It was going to be shut down too easily.
And all that sort of stuff. Basically, he found some budgetary and office reasons to shut it down rather than the technical capability.
Yeah, missiles designed to intercept re-entry buys with velocities in the Mach 6 range. This missile had a Mach 3.2 top speed. Would find the intercept of the low-altitude cruise missile to be a turkey shoot. I personally conducted an elaborate, unnecessary study of its vulnerability. I took pride in the accuracy, rigorousness, and technological impenetrability of this study.
So basically, he completely made a watertight argument for it.
Yeah.
And this is Craven, huh?
Yeah, that was Craven. That was not me who did it. I was reading a passage, but yes, that was Craven. There was just...
And that was all under Teller, remember?
Yeah, it was just all back then. It was was Teller? It
was Teller's baby, as I understand it from the way I read it.
Yeah. Wait. Yeah, I guess he was the head of Livermore at this point or something.
Yeah, and it was being tested at Livermore, so I presume it was his baby because he was all up. There's no way that something like that would have happened without him greenlighting it. A missile test on that level would not have happened without his presence or without his authorization.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's try and find this Nautilus stuff. Does anyone? I surprisingly don't have any notes about it, so I don't remember which page it's on, but I know it's rather early in the book.
Yeah, this is where basically he gets noted as a man of being smart, because he basically
it's like, hey, you know stuff.
He's like, hey, you're freaking smart. You just saved the Navy a large amount of public issues and public spectacle and a lot of money. Because basically, apparently, the Nautilus on its first trials, like, basically almost sinks several times due to, problems with surfacing, problems with its ballast tanks not clearing and blowing properly, and it makes a crap ton of noise. Like under the water, it's getting like huge turbulence pops and bumps and shimmies and stuff like that from pushing through the water.
We talked about vibration.
Yeah. And the Navy's frantic because this vibration could literally A, shake the ship apart, and B, there's no way it's going to be very silent. It's going to be audible even with the crappy sonars of the time.
It's funny, you never really hear about Nautilus doing anything except when it, went under did its little journey under the pole, and that was it.
Yeah. That's the thing to bear in mind. I mean, technically the Nautilus was a war fighting ship. It was nuclear capable. It had torpedoes. It was an armed ship. It was capable. It was the first ship of its kind, but it was theoretically capable of handling a trip to the Soviets to blow up subs and stuff. It was as close to an attack submarine as the era would permit. But at the same time, because nobody had ever done a nuclear powered ship before, they played it safe on the design, and they basically designed a diesel electric with a nuclear motor.
Well, you can argue if it was more of a proof of concept or if it was a war fighting machine.
I would argue nowadays it was probably I would argue nowadays it was a proof of concept, but the Navy wanted to present it like this was going to be the first of its kind, and
it was.
We were just going to take it all from there.
To me, it was. To me, Nautilus was the first submarine ever.
Well, the first nuclear one.
No, it's the first submarine. It's the first true submarine. Everything else was submersible.
Oh, okay. I'm with you now. That's fair. Because at that point in time, there's a bit of a crossroads in the R&D community for the submarines. They really were talking about, do we go nuclear or do we go, high advanced diesel electric? And it's kind of come full circle if you think about it, because nuclear submarines are getting really unpopular. They're way expensive, and we're seeing far more advances on AIP and things like that nowadays. It's like we're taking a step back to that sort of stuff.
If you want to be a blue water Navy, I'd be nuclear. If you're just worried about coastal and defending your coastline, then I'd get an AIP boat.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing. The overall global mission, strategically speaking, for most countries is turned into, we're going to defend our own shores. We're not necessarily interested in going to war with a major superpower.
So I'm presently trying to draw this as best I can, but I think the gist of it is, if I remember correctly, the Nautilus was double hulled. It had the internal pressure hull and then the exterior aero or hydro hull, rather hydrodynamic hull.
Yes, I remember a statement about that. Yeah.
So on modern American boats, they have the pressure hull and the hydrodynamic hull are for the most part the same part, at least along the long part of the ship. So what I've drawn here. So in here, this is the crew quarters right here. Then you have the hydrodynamic hull out here, and then this is one of the bulkheads that he's talking about that's separated from the pressure hull. In a single hulled submarine, these ring stiffeners are going to be inside the crew cabin here. But if you make this double hull design, you can put the ring stiffeners in between the pressure hull and the hydrodynamic hull. So what they found was that this ring stiffener here was separated from the internal pressure hull, which was basically like, holy crap, this is what keeps this thing from imploding, and it's not attached anymore.
Yeah, I was going to say that if for the avoidance of all doubt, having the ring stiffeners detached from anything that it's supporting and anything that it's keeping upright is bad, because it basically may as well just not exist.
Yeah.
See,
So
I'm surprised they didn't junk the boat.
Well, they should have.
I guess they found an easy way to fix it.
Well,
Or
the Navy really
they
should have junked the boat at that point in time. That's why Craven was being hailed as a superhero, because he found a way to repair the boat for a lot less than a new Nautilus.
Prize. Give the man a prize. That's what I was on with this.
I think the issue was no one knew why. They couldn't figure out why it was seeing much higher pressure loads than it really was, or they didn't even know what the problem was. So he devised his test system to find out that the boat was seeing this huge pressure buffeting and riffing along the hull that was just imparting huge forces on it.
So as
I
I'm
remember
reading
talking about
this,
it once about I'm just literally having beach balls inside the space between the two hulls.
So as I'm reading this, I'm thinking how things and whose careers might have been different had Nautilus been a failure.
Rickover would have been out.
What's that?
Rickover would have been out.
Damn straight.
And anything related to the nuclear navy would have nope. Like I said, without Rickover, you would be looking at, I don't know exactly how long, but if I had to put a number on it, I would say at least a minimum of a decade of minimum of no nuclear submarines.
When I was reading that part, I was telling Chazzy, I was like, wow. And that's what I was thinking of. I was thinking how things could have been different, how they've been, that's to me, that would have been unfixable. How would you have been able to trust that boat again?
Yeah, and in addition to the ring stiffeners being separated, they also found that there were splits all along the sides of the ballast tanks as well.
Right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. I mean,
so the Navy. So every time it was going out, it was basically having to be completely stripped down and rebuilt practically every time it went out.
Well, I think before they found the problem, they didn't even know that was an issue. They didn't even know that all this. I think was this the first time it came back into port and it was listing and down by the bow and
yeah.
I couldn't figure out what the hell was going on.
I'm pretty sure it's in the beginning of the book. I think he says I think it's the second time.
It's the first or the second sea trial, because the first sea trial is basically just a lap around the park, effectively.
Yeah, and the second one he's talking about there's no fanfare, there's no press, there's nobody here, and it's just quietly limping back into port.
Thus, 3 modes of failure were imminent: destruction of the pressure hull, loss of ability to hold ballast air, and the loss of air with which to blow ballast and provide the buoyancy to raise the submarine.
That's a really bad place to be.
Yeah, he said I must have read over this when I originally read it, but the compressed air bottles in the ballast tank that allow you to push air out were broken loose from their attachments to the hull inside the ballast tanks and were dangling from the piping that carried the air from bottle to tank.
No, I didn't go for that. I didn't. This is what I'm talking about. This is exactly what I'm talking about.
In a few hours, or at most a few days, the air bottles would detach completely, and then the frames would separate from the hull, and Nautilus and her crew of 116 hands would be doomed.
Gone. So that's what I'm talking about. They
never have been able to surface ever again.
Nope. That's what I'm talking about. So now, careers could have been a lot different.
Yes, absolutely.
Craven deserves a big fat wet kiss.
Thing is, he was decorated, but not for that.
Nope. Right. But that's to me that's the pivotal point in the book right there. I remember, Chazzy, when I told you that. That's what I was thinking. I was like, wow, dude, that could have ended up really different. And then I started thinking about Thresher. Was there any kind of, why didn't they learn?
The thing to bear in mind with Thresher and Scorpion, right, is that Thresher is obviously the last accident before Subsafe. And a lot of people go, oh, well, Subsafe didn't work because the Scorpion went down a little while later, but the Scorpion's problems were inherent from before Subsafe.
Right. Agreed.
Yeah, Scorpion it didn't have its retrofits yet or whatever. It was supposed to be getting those torpedoes with the leaky batteries replaced the next time it went into port, but they decided to keep it out on patrol instead.
Now, see, I couldn't picture that until you drew that out, so I appreciate that. you know, and if anybody that reads the book and has any issues that I had with it, I don't know how it worked out for you guys, but I couldn't visualize what they were talking about. But I was thinking about, wow, you know, that could have been disastrous, you know, shit dangling and boat coming down. I never heard that story about, I mean, you would think that would be part of the story. You know, I think that makes almost as intriguing story as the under the ice, going under the fucking polar ice cat or going to the North Pole.
Well, if you think that's nuts, wait till you find out about what he did for Ivy Bells. Operation Ivy Bells.
Okay, for Ivy Bells. Okay, all right, we'll do.
Are you familiar with Operation Ivy Bells? Have you heard?
Oh yes, I am.
So he had a hand in that.
It doesn't surprise me if it was crawling around on the bottom of the ocean. It doesn't surprise me.
Well, under Craven's leadership, that's how the U.S. Navy developed saturation diving.
So wow. I'm just to touch back on the Nautilus again. I'm on the Wikipedia page for it, and it does not mention any of these mechanical problems at all in here.
No, of course not. Like the Navy would not have wanted any of this getting out on their first ever boat.
I already beat you to that. You know, that's the first place I looked. My friends never mentioned it. You know, talked about this illustrious story. Like I said, I think it makes.
I don't think the enlisted would have known about it. I mean, what could the enlisted have done about it if this was all inside the second hull?
The guy I worked with was the guy. My friend's father was part of the reactor crew.
Yeah, I think only the captain, for sure. Only the captain, maybe the head engineer knew about what was going on and why Craven was on the boat or whatever. But I mean, they knew about like the popping and the stuff and everything like that, and I thought they probably thought it was just just the boat being the boat or whatever. I think there was a passage in the book that discussed that.
But I mean, the boat's been decommissioned since like the early '80s. I mean, stuff like that's going to come out, especially after it's decommissioned. It's no longer
totally.
Really a big deal.
That's why Craven's talking about it now, because it's important, but you got to bear in mind that the silent service really is silent. They really don't like talking about their submarines, even decommissioned ones. The Scorpion's loss report is still partly classified.
Well, none of that surprises me. I mean, that's because they don't want to give away how they found it. I mean,
no. The parts that it's been declassified even more. But it wasn't until the 90s where they admitted publicly and declassified publicly that the Navy had considered the idea of a hot running torpedo doing the damage. I've actually read the report. It's kind of fascinating, although it's in Navy speak, so it's really hard to follow. But most of what they still have blacked out are the published capabilities of the Scorpion, like what it could travel, how deep it could go, how fast it could go.
Oh,
they still won't talk about that.
Well, yeah. I mean, no one's talking about capabilities. I'm just talking about, like my buddy had this photo, and he wouldn't let me see it until it decommissioned.
Yeah.
And when I saw it, it was really no big deal after it was decommissioned. It was just some radar antenna.
Yeah.
Wouldn't let me see it until it was decommissioned.
Same thing.
That was somebody on the boat.
Yep. Stuff like that. It doesn't mean anything to a layperson, but to an engineer or a scientist who's involved with that, they can back calculate a lot about what's going on with something just looking at stuff like that.
Yeah, they'll get an idea of its range, what kind of its line of sight is,
all that kind of stuff. The fact that it can carry it at all. I mean, it kind of looked funky. It looked like a big fan, big with a hump on the back. But it really pissed me off as a kid because it was like, he bragged about it. I got this picture I can't let you see.
A little shit.
Right?
One of the other things that I found particularly fascinating is when he was talking about the work that he did before he became involved with all this stuff, about how to make mine detectors work.
Oh yeah, the pressure mines.
He tries to find a way to get wake homing or pressure sensitive mines to blow up early, and he basically just comes up with the concept of running a destroyer at flank speed towards the coast and making it do a sharp bend to simulate the wave at the high sea state of the model Polaris missile they're trying to release and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's pretty cool in that same story, because initially he couldn't find Well, he wanted to get an aircraft carrier to do it, and they're
Yeah.
all like, "Yeah, fuck no, we're
Nope.
not doing that. That
Nope.
was really,
Nope.
really dangerous." And they
Nope.
had some side boat do it, and then once that went on successfully, suddenly all the people were up lining up, like, "Yeah, please let me do it. I want to do this. I want to do this crazy maneuver."
Yeah, I think
when you read it, you realize why it's so crazy. I mean, they're traveling at 35 knots towards hard ground. We're not talking just run aground. We're talking like to the shoals.
Yeah,
And
I think that
hard port. They actually had. I remember a line where he says that there's a second helmsman at the station in case the first guy hesitates.
Yeah, I think that second part there was when they were trying to make like the biggest wave possible for the test launch of the Polaris missile.
That's right. Yeah.
Very nice.
They wanted to prove it could operate on all sea states.
Yeah, like when you got down to some of the weeds about how the Polaris had to operate, I was like, yeah, this is a pretty intense operational envelope. It has to be able to launch in all sea states and not fail just because there's a wave above it or something.
There's an interesting passage slightly further on in the book where they figure out the issue with launching, and they do the last live test, and the missile comes out and it flies off and it starts to veer off course and then steer back and veer off course, and the guy in charge, instead of canceling it, he just exclaims, like, he goes like, aha, and he figures out that, oh, we forgot to account for the roll and pitch of the boat, so the missile is going up in sync with the boat and just rolling back and forth as it was going towards its target.
Yeah, that was nuts. That was funny.
It's like, and that is a live nuke. It's not like even like a dummy. That was a live nuke they shot off.
Yeah, that was a live nuke.
Proper nuclear depth test, yeah. No, I mean, like if you think about it, like back then they didn't have computer simulations and stuff like that, so all this stuff had to be done at least once or twice in real life, like minimum. It had to be repeatable, and they had to demonstrate it. So they had to drop real nukes. They had to drop, they had to, fire real life missiles, whether it was nuke or not, And if you think about it, that's pretty terrifying and an expensive way to do it.
Well, they still do it today, to be honest with you.
Oh, they have to, yeah.
I can remember
you gotta test it.
You see a missile, and they would come and rip it out. I was part of the 4th Air Force, and then they would come from March Air Force Base and say, take that missile out. They'd come and take it out, take the can off, obviously, and take it to Vandenberg and launch it to Kwajalein. I don't know how it's pronounced.
Launch it into the ocean somewhere.
Somewhere in the Pacific. And they would have all kind of telemetry about it, and it was kind of like a pride thing, because
there's also the political element. You launched it once, but you need to demonstrate you can launch them over and over again with a fair degree of reliability, and they're always landing in the same spot.
Well, that, and it would come down to, like, who did better between Malmstrom and F.E. Warren, or Malmstrom and Grand Forks,
Their inter-service rivalry, but you still got inter-silo rivalry and all that sort, and
inter-base rivalry.
Yeah, base rivalry.
Inter-base rivalry for sure. Inter-base or inter-Air Force rivalry, because their 15th Air Force was the other one, 4th and the 15th Air Force. So
yeah, and then they still want to prove to the guys at SAC that they've still got a good job to do, and that they don't just have to hand all the nukes over to the bombers.
And all aspects take part. Down to the people who are ripping out the missiles, they're all part of the exercise, because they get to practice their trade. So, it's a big deal. I think it was called Operation Global Shield. I forgot now. But when we did a Global Shield exercise, that's what it was. Yeah. And they still do that today.
Oh, for sure. Except now they just have to tell the Russians when they're doing it, so they don't make everyone shit themselves.
Yes.
Plus, so just Minutemans are so fucking old, they got to make sure they work.
Yep.
I couldn't believe this when I found this out, but there's an article in Wired just from last year pointing out that the Minuteman's launch parameters and everything are still loaded into the computer with an 8-inch floppy disk.
Oh, yeah.
There's a good documentary about that on YouTube you can look up, and it shows you these guys sitting there, and it's ancient computers, and they did like a security check, and it basically passed with flying colors simply because it's not connected to the internet. There's no way of hacking into that. You'd have to get down there overpower these guys, and even then still you wouldn't know how to proceed because you don't know the codes to the lockers.
Yeah, not just that. Even if you did have access to all that and you didn't want to hack the system, you'd have to know some pretty old languages like COBOL and Fortran and shit.
And you would need two people because one person can't turn both keys.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You would actually need 4 people because you would need another capsule to confirm it. One capsule can't launch one capsule can't launch its missiles. It has to be confirmed by another capsule.
So it needs to come out of 2 different silos as well.
Yes, that's redundancy in the system. That means that even though, let's say, a capsule goes mad, they can't launch their missiles unless another capsule validates it.
Yep, that is the definition of fail-safe right there.
Yes, it is.
Right.
I know this because I was there. Yep. And they talked about it.
Since we've been talking about Polaris again, I was going through my notes, and there's an interesting quote from JFK about Deterrent on page 92. It was talking about, like false attacks, interpreting false attacks or something like that. It says, the fact of the matter is that the United States could wait quite long because we have missiles in hardened sites, and those missiles, even if there were a missile attack on the U.S., those missiles could still be fired and destroy the Soviet Union, and so could the Polaris submarine missiles. So I don't think that there is a danger that we would fire based on incomplete and inaccurate information because we were only given 5 or 6 minutes to make a judgment. I think the Polaris alone permits us to wait to make sure that we are going to have sufficient in hand that he knows that we could destroy the Soviet Union. Actually, that is the purpose of Deterrent. And that's an interesting, when I read that, that was an interesting way to put it. Like, there's basically like no need to respond to a false attack or an attack, perhaps maybe a low confidence attack that you're not sure of, because even if they do hit you, some of your deterrent's still going to survive, and you'll still be able to hit back.
You'll still have a counter attack, which should make them think twice about doing it in the first place.
Yeah, and then there's no reason.
That's the whole premise behind the nuclear triad.
Yeah, so the point of it basically is that, like, even if you think there's like an attack coming in, you might as well wait to see if it actually happens, because you're going to end up blowing up the other guy anyway, regardless. If it is like if it turns out to be a false attack, you don't need to jump the gun and actually do it on accident or something.
Okay, just break it down in layman's terms. There's really no rush to end the world.
Yes.
Right.
Like if
have a cigarette and
yeah, like if they've already the difference between a false attack and a real attack, like if their missiles end up hitting, you can still strike back, but there's no need. If it's like, there's no need to launch until like you know that the missiles have hit, because you're gonna get destroyed anyway. Basically, it's kind of like a
mutually
sobering.
It's the end game basically.
Yeah, basically, like there's no need to react to like a low confidence attack. Like wait it out and see what happens. There's no need to have like an itchy trigger finger.
It's worked before, but on the other side of the curtain.
Yeah, that one operator in the Soviet Union sat there and had a cigarette before he fucking realized that it was an error.
Literally just chose not to report it.
I was about to bring that up, but I figured since it was not in the scope of the book, I going to let that out. But I actually saw that particular video of that guy being interviewed, and instead of praising it and saying like, "Oh, you did good, you prevented from," because I think it was like the fucking sun coming up over the Rockies or some shit. There's like some sort of glare their satellite picked up, and he kept getting launch indications, and he just decided like, no, I'm gonna hold off here. I'm not gonna retaliate based off of this information. It's good he did, because there never was a launch, but instead of rewarding him, I guess they just shipped him off, I think, and he basically just got fired from his position, and nobody ever talked about him anymore.
They gave him the Brutanov treatment.
They pensioned him off, basically.
Yeah, it was the same thing they did with the guy with the Yankee class submarine, who basically prevented a nuclear holocaust. They axed him too. You get in a situation like that and you're just not trusted again, especially in that society. You lose trust and you're not trusted.
It's interesting, isn't it? You prevent the one thing they're all trying to stop from happening, and you get the axe.
in both cases they both defied orders.
Yeah, I mean, the bottom line is however you want to slice it, the Soviets axed the guy because he demonstrated that he was not willing to pull the trigger when he was given all orders to.
Well, yeah, he demonstrated that he thinks, and their doctrine kind of their doctrine goes against that.
Well, yeah, in the end, we should be happy. I mean, if he was a Soviet drone and he would have retaliated, we probably wouldn't be sitting here right now.
Guaranteed. That's a guarantee, man. Because those boys
we kind of owe a lot to that guy.
Oh, totally. But at the same time, you have to bear in mind that what that also demonstrated is that maybe the will to launch isn't there, which put the Soviets at a disadvantage.
Yeah, that kind of ties into what Craven said at some point, that like the CIA's purpose was to kind of show the Soviets that they didn't have to eventually show the Soviets that they didn't have full command and control over their armed forces. Which it was very interesting to see that strategy laid out like that. It's another time in this book when it's like something that's right there in plain view to see, but until someone kind of spells it out, you don't really think of it that way.
All very interesting. All very interesting.
Trying to get back to the book, there was another point that I remember hearing, kind of somewhat related to this, when they're talking about how they had basically tapped the major naval circuit between, where was it, Petrograd and Kaliningrad or something like that, and anything to do with the Navy went through that circuit. And Craven had a large part in obviously helping the American boats, the submarines, develop the technology to get in there and do that. Because back then, they had the old Seawolf, not the current Seawolf. They had an older Seawolf that they lengthened the boat of, and then it wasn't until he pointed all this stuff out, now that's public record, that you think to yourself, how many times have you seen a boat come in for a refit and come out slightly differently? And it's obvious nowadays that what they've done is they've done something to make it an intelligence asset.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like that was described in Blind Man's Bluff, and also Red November, that mission to put that basically.
I think that's gonna be my next book, is Blind Man's Bluff. I
haven't read that in a long time, but I should read it again.
It's been a while since I've read it myself, but it's a very good companion to this book, because some of Craven's criticism is a result of him reading that book and going, "No, you got some parts wrong."
Yeah, he said that right off the bat.
They bring up something where, in Blind Man's Bluff, they claim to have interviewed Craven. He's like, no, never happened.
I'm kind of scanning through this video that you put out here, and the guy in the beginning, I don't know who that was, but I'm like, hey, that's not Craven.
No. Well, that video I sent actually to you guys, that's a good view for after this meeting. But it's it's about, up here. Yeah, it's about 40 to 50 minutes long, and it actually, several topics we've talked about, NR1, the bits about Teller. There's a lot of stuff in there, and anecdotes and cool interviews in that documentary that are that are worth viewing, and I think it ties in with the book pretty well. It's around the same era, and it's talking about the same things, and the Boat of the Month Club and all that era is being discussed as well.
I'm actually reasonably certain I've seen Craven in that documentary, because I think I read it.
Yeah, he is in that documentary.
Yeah, he's in it. I looked, but I thought, first of all, I thought Shazzy put it up there, and second of all, and I'm sorry because I see Ed put it up there, but at first, when I seen it, it was like, okay, it's featured Teller, but it's featured Craven. But then when I'm looking at the guy, I'm like, that's not Craven. But then when I scanned it, obviously he's in there. Yeah, I started looking at it and then I stopped, so it's in my viewed history. And so when I get a little bit of time here later, I'll look at it. Looks very interesting.
To be perfectly honest with you, Ben, think of it as kind of a cheat sheet for this book.
Oh yeah, like I said, I felt like I've read enough of the book where I could at least offer a that much of an opinion, and felt like I knew what I was, at least halfway knew what I was talking about. But I know that there's still juicy tidbits left to go. There's still just from what Stanley's been talking about.
There's Scorpion and Red September to still really talk about.
We got all kinds of Red October, Red November, Red September. Jesus Christ. You're gonna be up to Red April.
theoretically they're all one and the same thing, but they're under different names because of, well, intelligence and its wonderful marble.
Fucking Blue January and shit. Jesus Christ.
All right, so to relate to Scorpion on page 215, I
Okay.
believe he talks about battery explosions. I think he was talking about the. Let's see here. Let me try and. Okay, this was actually regarding the Gulf, which is Red September. This is the boat that the Soviets lost northwest of Hawaii around the same time the Scorpion was lost, which is a cosmic coincidence. But so like someone was thinking that it was a battery explosion that blew up the Gulf, but Craven, in my notes, I had it written as battery explosion is a false correlation. The battery will always blow up when a sub sinks because it will be coming into contact with seawater at some point. So Craven says it tends to be an effect and not the cause of a sub sinking.
Yeah. The other thing to bear in mind is just to give you some context there. I've been looking into this myself. It sounds like a really bad coincidence, but there were actually 4 submarine losses the same year that Scorpion went under. There was a French submarine that went missing in the Mediterranean, and there was another Russian submarine that was a near casualty as well. So,
Yeah.
like, I think at that point in time in the history of sort of submarine development, most nations came up with some kind of crossroads where submarine safety was becoming more important because the submarines were being used so heavily at that point in time in the war. Cold War.
Yeah, it was like the middle of the 60s, I think, when all this happened.
Yeah, people were finally starting to realize, you know what, you can't treat these things like the old World War II beaters.
Yeah, they need much more rigor in their safety. But shall we discuss the Scorpion or the Gulf first? Because there's a lot to unpack for both of them. More so the Gulf.
I think if that's the case, we could leave the Gulf for later because there's a whole other element there from not just the Gulf being sunk in the first place, but obviously what happened to it afterward.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, we can touch on the Scorpion first then. I actually don't know if I have too many notes on the Scorpion. It seemed like it was a rather simple case of just pretty much a freak accident as to what sunk the Scorpion.
Well, first of all, just a little bit of context. I mean, for those of you that aren't major submarine fans, and if you are, then why the hell are you listening to FPS Shazley's channel? But was probably, I think, the worst U.S. naval disaster involving a submarine ever. It resulted in the loss of the entire crew for reasons that the Navy are still not absolutely certain of, at least publicly. And quite simply, the submarine, what followed afterwards, once the submarine was reported overdue, was a huge hunt for the submarine and its remaining parts. You guys might have heard of Robert Ballard, right?
Yep.
He's the guy that found the Titanic. And quite simply, one of the things that I found out later on is that Ballard's cover story for hunting for the Titanic and the funding he was given for the Titanic was on the string that he had to help find the Scorpion first.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So basically, short brass tacks are they eventually find the submarine. Because bear in mind that the cause is unknown, but still after they haven't found the submarine. They're frantically trying to figure out what went wrong because obviously if there's a major problem with the submarine, there could be a problem with the whole fleet of them. Because they've already launched like 300 boats or something by this point. They've got lots of boats in the water and they're like frantically trying to worry about what's happened to this one. In the end, they still can't draw a definitive conclusion, although Craven in his book comes across like he had plenty of good theories that the Navy didn't want to listen to, because they would have had to admit a lot more liability than they perhaps would have liked to. And the theory that Craven prefers to put forward is that it was a hot running torpedo that turned around, that turned around and sank the Scorpion. To give you an idea of where you are with that, why the hell the torpedo was launched and why it went around in the first place is, in the event that a torpedo starts running hot inside the torpedo room, the only safe course of action is to get rid of the torpedo. Otherwise, it could very easily explode inside the submarine, which would definitely doom everyone. So the chance are is that if somehow the torpedo is to be accidentally activated mid maintenance, for example, you would load the torpedo, assuming it wasn't already loaded, and you would immediately eject it out of the tube, and then perform some sort of evasion technique and hope that it doesn't turn around and bite you in the ass, because there is actually a countermeasure in the Mark 37s that if it turns 180 degrees, it disables itself.
Yeah, I thought I heard that the torpedo was in the tube and it was hot running, and they did a right full rudder to try and do that 180 turn so the thing would shut off in the tube or whatever.
My understanding of it would be that if that was the case and it exploded inside the torpedo, there would have been far more evidence of damage than we noticed. Basically,
well,
what you would have done ideally is you would have done that, or my understanding is that they would actually have launched it, because once it's launched, even if it goes swimming around and it turns around, it's meant to have a failsafe that stops that from coming around and getting the sub.
Mm-hmm.
But at least then there's a chance, if it's out of the water, then if it explodes, it'll explode away from the submarine rather than inside the tube.
I think they said in the book when they found the boat in 1969, they said the front of it was like buried in the muck, so they couldn't really see the torpedo room to see what had been done to it.
Yeah, but the fact is that it was buried in the muck. If it had exploded inside the torpedo tube, there wouldn't have been a front of the boat. That would have been a pretty fatal rupture.
I think it goes to the overall speculation that nobody still knows, really.
This is the point, right? I mean, this is the point. And this is the reason. I mean, the thing is, you have to understand that obviously Craven's got his point of view and his agenda as to what went and happened.
Yeah, and if you read Red November, Reed's got his point of view, and it almost seems, he almost thinks that it was taken out by an echo, right?
No. He says that some scientific guy, some researcher had investigated the Scorpion accident and thought that it was a explosion of the Scorpion's battery compartment or whatever.
Yeah.
Reed said that?
Yeah, in the end of the book.
Yeah, Craven actually addresses a few of these points and theories and explains why it couldn't possibly be these. Although I should point out that there's going to be a large quantity of author bias, because he has his own agenda, he has his own theories, and he's obviously going to crap all over the ones that he feels are wrong and why. So try and take that with a bit of a pinch of salt, so to speak, because he is going to have his own ideas.
Oh, that's the beauty about reading the books. Is you get a lot of opinions.
You need to read
them. I don't know. Yeah. No, I'm not. I take it all with a grain
I'm
of salt.
personally more convinced by Craven's explanation than any of the others that I've heard, but that might just be because he's I prefer the way he writes, and I think he's able to far more convince me, if you know what I mean. But that still doesn't explain why the torpedo was launched in the first place or any of that sort of stuff.
Yeah, he said they did tests to confirm their hypothesis that the Scorpion was actually traveling east when it should have been traveling west, which it supports the hot running torpedo theory. And he mentioned something about the sub was where they expected it to be. They found it where they expected it to be, which kind of, for some reason, discredits the enemy's submarine sinking the Scorpion theory.
Oh, I believe that whatever happened, it was a casualty with the Scorpion and the Scorpion alone. I don't believe there was a Russian sub or any of the other kind of sub that wasn't where it was supposed to be, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, on page 211, he notes, some 20 years after her loss, however, it was revealed that the torpedo batteries on the boat may have been defective and could have accounted for the loss. Tragically, the defect had been identified at the time, and the batteries had been recalled from the fleet, but Scorpion was still on patrol, and a decision was made to change her batteries on her return. In the face of the risks and demands of war and Cold War missions, who can fault a decision to trade one risk for another in order to complete a mission?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it doesn't seem to me very much there that Craven obviously it doesn't seem to me very much that Craven is angry at the Navy for, letting them run around with dodgy torpedoes, if that's his hypothesis.
Yeah.
Kind of understood the point of the mission and that the acceptable risk was there. But I think he does a lot more to acknowledge the fact that this was a risk than potentially just, wiping it under the table. I think between that and the Freedom of Information Act that some of these other folks got ahead of them to point this out, they did a long way towards getting people to think about the Scorpion in that respect.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, he said they also ran a simulation with like a sub skipper, the former skipper of Scorpion, to see what he would do in this situation. And they, I guess I might as well read it. Given no hint of our theory, Fountain, this is his name, was told only that he was heading home at 18 knots at a depth left up to him. This is on page 210 to 211. When he was well underway, we asked him to check his torpedoes, and moments later sounded an alert with the cry, "Hot running torpedo." With barely a blink of his eye, Fountain shouted, "Right full rudder," the command to initiate a 180-degree turn. When the simulated Scorpion had completely turned around, a simulated explosion took place in the torpedo room, and the skipper, made aware of rapid flooding, issued a series of commands aimed at rescuing the boat and bringing her to the surface. But instead, she continued to plummet, reaching collapse depth and imploding in 90 seconds, 1 second shy of the acoustic record of the actual event. Thus, the hot-running torpedo scenario was now the highest priority, but not the only priority.
It's almost like I want to click off now.
Oh, yeah?
I would have rather waited to read that little tidbit. I mean, I know you can't,
To be perfectly fair, it's going to be one of those things where you're going to see little bits and bobs like that, even if we were not going to possibly describe every aspect of the book to you. There are going to be things we miss anyway, so don't worry about it. You are going to catch plenty of good stuff on that book.
If you want to miss the big spoilers about the Gulf being lost, then maybe you should. If you want to read it for yourself, at least.
I suppose the biggest question is, Ben, are you currently aware of the Glomar Explorer?
Oh yeah, I know about all this stuff. I mean, it's not like, I mean, if it's going to be some big linchpin thing that I didn't know, then I might want to read it on my own. But I don't mind, learning it here. I mean, I'm going to read it anyway. No big deal. That's my penalty. If anything. But
yeah, I knew about the Glomar Explorer, but the potential ramifications of why the Gulf was where it sunk is what's particularly interesting to me about that part.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that they find him at some exact latitude and longitude, that's a completely human construct. It's either the world's craziest coincidence or some very serious ramifications for that.
Yeah, so I guess we don't need to explain too much about it because it's assumed that people have read the book about the backstory, but just to reiterate, this was a Gulf that was way out of its patrol area when it sunk, when they triangulated its explosion, and looked like it was potentially on the way to head for Hawaii for whatever reason. He seems to lead some credence to the theory that this submarine was rogue in one form or another, whether that means rogue hostile or like rogue
launching missile rogue is two different things.
Yeah, whether it's like rogue defect or rogue hostile is.
Red October was considered a road. Padoran considered them rogue. Put it that way.
Well, yeah, the Soviets knew he was rogue defective, but told the Americans rogue hostile to try and help him sink him.
The bottom line is that one way or the other, it can't be denied that if that was the case and that was the theory they were working on, this was a Soviet submarine out with the control of the Soviet leadership, wherever it was.
Out of command and control.
Yep.
Now, there's some interesting tidbits about the sinking of this boat. There was no implosion. There was only the sound of an explosion. The boat did not implode, and the only conclusion they could draw from that was that it was not running at any kind of battle stations when this explosion happened. All the hatches were open, and the boat flooded before it reached crush depth, which is very interesting. They also found a guy with heavy weather gear on, which implies the boat was on the surface. Do these Gulf submarines have to be on the surface to launch a missile? I don't know. They could have had a casualty, perhaps, and were on the surface for that reason.
there's any number of reasons why it could have why it could have happened. Moving on to the next part of what happens next. The bottom line is that thanks to the actions of the U.S. Navy, I don't think we'll ever conclusively know, because they pretty much destroyed the evidence in their attempt to go grab it.
So on page 279, which is very close to the end of the book, in the first paragraph here, let's see. So this is Craven talking about all this stuff. Let me see, where's a good place to start? Let's see here. This is him talking about the Gulf and its motives. It's the last sentence of the first paragraph here. But the secret residing in the secret, the motivations of that Soviet captain and his crew, had remained intact, and that, ironically, is the secret that ought to be revealed. Now, this is an interesting sentence for me, because it seems to imply that the Navy knows what was happening with this, but has not declassified it.
I never really considered that implication, but I now that you say it, I can't get away from it.
Yeah, like it's like basically in my notes I wrote down Red September's motive is known with a question mark. And that's, yeah, when I read that, that was how I read that, and I was like, holy crap, is that true? The Navy knows what this submarine was doing there. Because they correct me if I'm wrong, but they did recover some stuff from the boat.
My understanding of it, I don't know it fully from not from the knowledge of this book, but from other reading, is that they recovered approximately a third of it.
Yeah, I think it was like the front third or something.
Yeah, but the rest of it just destroyed itself. The accounts from the documentary that Edds has linked actually just describe that the rest of the boat fell apart and disintegrated. I personally don't buy that. I personally believe that is the cover story. I think they did recover it.
Yeah, I remember in the documentary they said supposedly one of like the lifting arms on the thing gave way, and then the boat broke up at that point.
Red November seems to leave room for wiggle room there to think that there's some recovery there.
And then also, the boat was supposed to have 3 missiles, I believe, but only when they found
one fell out.
One missile was missing for whatever reason and was not found. So whether that was the missile that, let's see here. Let me look at my notes.
Let's put it this way: if that's the case, then if the missile disappeared, it either disappeared beforehand, and there was a recovery attempt previous to the one we know about, or it was launched. In which case, the Navy definitely knew that missile, but that was a rogue ship, or it was destroyed in the explosion, and that was the cause of the casualty, a missile explosion or a missile failure.
Yeah, I'm going to read from page 218, the first paragraph here. The Soviets, like us, have certain mechanisms designed to prevent the unauthorized launching of a missile or the unauthorized arming of its warhead. Nothing that has been invented through man's ingenuity cannot be circumvented by equal ingenuity, and a little bit good luck. Here may be a case where both ran just a bit short. The unauthorized attempt to launch or arm the missile and its warhead may have triggered a mechanism in the warhead, which in turn triggered the high explosive component in the warhead, because such precautionary mechanisms are designed to do just that, to prevent such unauthorized use. The possibility of defeating these precautionary systems is small.
No, you're not going to do that. Yeah, I believe that. I would go with that. But that's
I think
chilling.
That's quite interesting. Not only have the Soviets got a system in place that would cause the loss of a submarine in the event of a rogue launch.
Yeah, it would actually blow up the warhead.
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting that not only do we know that the Soviets have that, but Craven has just admitted there effectively that the Americans have a similar system.
Yeah, if someone tries to launch a missile unauthorized,
the whole ship gets destroyed.
It's going to make like half of like the high explosive in the warhead blow up.
Good.
Very effective.
Yeah, absolutely, it is very effective, but I think it's quite a surprising way. I mean, I didn't think of that as a potential thing that the U.S. Navy would have in their ships. Oh, you want to launch a rogue nuclear missile, the missile will fail. Okay, fair enough. You want to launch a rogue nuclear missile, the whole ship explodes. That's a bit of a difference.
Well, I think the point to that is that they're probably assuming a couple of storylines here, and one of them is an illegal launch, but one of them could also very well be a stolen warhead. And even in that
A
case, if
stolen
somebody
launch,
tries
yeah.
to ignite it, you really want to get rid of it. So I think there's good reason for them to do it the way they do, and just make it blow up if somebody tries to tamper with it or somebody tries to launch it without proper authorization.
That's fair. Bottom line is that what then happens is Craven largely doesn't. He says by this time he's like somewhat retired. He's got like a professorship or a university thing that he's doing in Hawaii or something like that. But he's obviously kept aware of what's going on with the Glomar Explorer and its activity.
Yeah. He was. I think let it be noted though that he was opposed to it because the boat did not have a credible cover story, and he was always of the camp that every
Like,
cover story should be true.
And he was like, "Yeah, they're apparently going to be looking for manganese nodules on the ocean floor." And he was like, "No, that's not even remotely viable."
Yeah, that's like nowhere near remotely being viable at this point in time. Just to maybe perhaps end this golf discussion, but to put it succinctly, I'm quoting from the second to last paragraph on page 217 here. To put it succinctly, there existed a possibility, small though it may be, that the skipper of this rogue submarine was attempting to launch or had actually launched a ballistic missile with a live warhead in the direction of Hawaii.
I don't know how something like that can be kept a secret all this time.
Yeah, I mean, would there have been a capability to detect a launch in the middle of the Pacific Ocean like that? Was that at the time when such satellites had existed yet, or no?
No, I don't think so. When was that, in the 60s?
Yeah, this is like mid '60s, I think.
Yeah, barely.
Airborne early warning. Well, you'd potentially have early warning radar from Hawaii and Guam and things like that as well, potentially.
Mm-hmm.
The bottom line is that you're right. I mean, there's no guarantee they would have detected it, but at the same time, if it had been detected, there are plenty of people who would have known about it. For example, the people who operate the radar scopes, higher command, all the way up to the White House, and then back down to the U.S. Navy.
Okay. I'm actually on the Wikipedia page here, and it's interesting because they say that the boat imploded, whereas Craven's report is that it exploded on the surface and then just merely sunk.
The other thing you have to bear in mind is that he's an intelligence guy.
Well, that's what we have to also be aware of. Just because Craven, he's a good guy and delivers it well, that we take whatever he says as gospel.
I'm more inclined to take what he says in this book than on Wikipedia.
Oh, well, I'm just saying. Well, it goes both ways, I mean, I'm just saying he could be wrong also.
I think the
You have to
bottom
bear in
line is
mind
we're never going to know.
No, never going to know. You're not going to know for a long time conclusively. And then,
You know what, Chesley, in that respect, his book could be all disinformation. I'm not saying it is, but it could be.
It could be.
if he subscribes to the notion that every cover story should have a grain of truth in it, then if you think about it, this entire piece could be an absolute masterpiece of disinformation by containing small grains of truth that are publicly knowledge. If you think about it, he's not really telling us anything we don't already have access to the knowledge of. He's just putting it all together from his point of view, supposedly. And it's not to put doubt on the guy. I mean, I'm not saying that all of this stuff is made up, but he isn't going to comment if there's stuff like this that he thinks is nationally sensitive, that he disagreed with, and he was opposed to. You can bet he's not going to paint it in a positive light.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, he does do that. He particularly the Nixon administration and stuff.
Yeah, he hated the Nixon administration.
But to be fair, Nixon was also a loony.
I just love there's one part where he talks about how he's asked to as a secret Democrat, basically an all Republican cabinet, he's asked to help convince to help write a report on the value of mining on the sea. And I can't remember who it was, but basically one of the senior level officials puts a writer something up on the blackboard, and he says, "Your report has to come to this conclusion."
Oh yeah. He said he was part of like the effort to make like oceans. I think it was the Nixon administration was making like everything deal with like, I guess taking advantage of the ocean is the way to word it, as like making it classified to be part of like
basically
intelligence gathering or whatever.
Basically what they wanted is they didn't want anything anywhere near. They didn't want the general public to have, or private firms or national firms to have any interest in the exploration of the ocean, because then they would have bumped into intelligence gathering activities, right?
Yeah, I think that's the gist of it. Because when I first read it, it didn't make sense to me, but now it does. I think that was, and after finishing the book, I think that was the gist of it. Yeah.
I also thought it was kind of cute. My little contribution here, where Craven was talking about, when they were getting Polaris to go, and the model companies were bidding, the plastic model companies were bidding to see who was going to be able to announce to the world our new, deterrence force. And I was there thinking, God, how much of my dollars did I contribute to this?
Well, just think about the F-19, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's like, wow, really model airplanes that, is that how, the Soviets got their first look at the Polaris, is through, plastic models?
Very
really?
Probably. I mean, if you think about it, how much did we know about Russian submarines outside of model kits, what we read out of Jane's?
Right. I was reading a book. I've got a book, I'm old, everybody knows how old and crusty I am. I have a book that, they were talking about the T-64 tank, and they were saying, in my book, where, well, it hasn't been publicly photographed. I'm sort of thinking, wow, there was a time when you didn't see stuff that the Soviets put out. You heard about it, but you never saw it. They would have artist renditions of it in the book, but they wouldn't have a real picture of it because it was never photographed, never seen outside the Soviet Union. Are we still on?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Along those lines, and this is a bit of a tangent here, but one of my favorite examples of that kind of misinformation from both sides is the development of the F-15. The F-15 was developed to counter a threat that didn't actually exist.
Exactly, but it's all about spending money. It's all about create a threat so you can get a whole bunch of people scared, and like
even about that, it's like CIA just had bad intel. You couldn't get past the Iron Curtain at the time, so the CIA gets word of a series of tests out of the MiG factory. One is a test talking about an aircraft test article going at Mach 3 at 50,000 feet. And the other one is a test article where it's doing a simulated dogfight pulling in excess of 9 Gs. And the CIA shits themselves because they're hearing about these two tests from prototype aircraft from the MiG factory. They don't realise that these are two separate aircraft, the MiG-25 and the MiG-29.
But they knew about the engines on the MiG-25 because when they were flying, when Russians were dressing up as Israeli MiG-25s and flying them across Israel, and Israel would try in vain to sortie their force to intercept, and they would burn up their engines. The MiGs would burn up their engines when they'd land. They knew that they were doing this. They just thought it was just a freakish occurrence instead of something that's going to actually happen. But it came through in the security that these engines are going to burn up. This is what they're going to do. This plane can't actually do Mach 3.2 because it's going to burn up the engines. It's more closer to 2.8, and it was all confirmed when Belenko when he defected with his MiG-25 to Japan on September 6, 1976.
Yeah, but by then the F-15 was already greenlit.
It was already greenlighted, exactly. But there were rumors of it. That was what my point is. There were rumors of it. They already kind of knew that this was something that's going to happen. But just as Foxbat was the scare word of the 70s, backfire was the scare word of the 80s. And
Yeah.
they did the same thing with the backfire bomber. Oh my God, and it turns out the backfire bomber was really nothing. It's just the way it's the way the defense industry, it scares the senators and the appropriations. Oh my God, there has to be justification to the cause. They can't just.
And there's a certain element to that, but I think the other thing as well is that the CIAs or the intelligence community is gathering all this stuff, and obviously they sometimes get their wires crossed.
Sure,
It's not because of any malice. They're obviously trying to defend their country. They're not looking for a kickback or anything like that, at least not publicly. But the bottom line is that
Eisenhower said it himself. Eisenhower talked about the vast
military-industrial
industrial complex. Yeah, it's out there, man. I mean, Raytheon and Boeing and all, they're big business, man. That's big business, and sell more engines, big business, and you got to justify it. If there's no threat, there's no justification.
Yeah, it's a road of vicious circle to go down. Like, I got to make sure I'm as safe as possible, but sometimes you start scaring yourself.
Ghost Dog, you keep bringing up that plane, the X-35. You keep bringing it up. Perfect example. I'm hearing that the Navy don't even want it, and they're forcing it on them anyway.
The reason why they don't want it though is because the Marines got their hands on it and wanted to make it VTOL.
Okay, but whatever. They still don't want it, and they're being forced to take it anyway because wow, gee, you don't even want it. They don't get before it, but this is what's on their plate. You got to take it.
Yeah.
I mean, I've heard so many contradictory reports on that. It just sounds like people just saying their opinions about it at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I'm reserving my opinion for its performance because ultimately that's all I got no dog in the hunt.
I got no dog in the hunt. I hope it fucking all the money. My penny's gone to it. I hope it works.
The argument, I've had arguments with people. I'll say arguments. I've had debates with people about this in the past, and people are saying, "Oh, the F-35 isn't as horrible as people say it is. It's running rings around all of its competitors and all that stuff. Like that's great, but what about the cost? It's the cost that I've always taken objection to because it's been like way over budget, way over time. I mean,
you discussed that earlier. Yeah. You discussed that earlier. You can't complain about that. That's going to something else, right?
Right, exactly. And that's what nobody's paying attention to. That's the debate I'm talking about, right? Yeah. Everyone's like, oh, the cost. I'm like, yeah, the cost. Nobody's talking about the cost from the point of view of it's over budget. Everyone's talking about it because it's over budget. Nobody's talking about what that money's actually going on because
you're not going to find out. You right now. You already won that argument. You're never going to find out where that money's going to. It's going to be everything's going to be over budget. Well,
that's the thing. Lockheed Martin have a proven track history of pulling this shit.
I mean, Chazzy, weren't you talking about you just finished a program and you came in under budget? Was that something or?
Oh, no.
I thought you finished something and you came in under budget, or you finished.
No, the rule of thumb is projects always go over budget.
There you go. Okay, well then you just proved my point. Then there you go. Boom. I wonder where that little money went to. Probably went to line in somebody's pockets. Who knows? I don't know.
It went to the fact that it took longer than we thought.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
For the F-35, it's a huge weapon system, and it's like
different.
In Skunkworks, you kind of get some insight into this. The book Skunkworks.
Yes, I read that, and that's another good one you guys should read.
Yeah, because back in the day, you used to have single companies working on a bunch of different iterations of many different planes, and nowadays there aren't as many planes to be made. So, as part of the defense industry's
components.
Willingness to keep all these, they don't want these companies with experience to go out of business, so they make sure everyone has a hand in it.
Components, they make the components of the plane. Like this guy will make the stabilizers, this guy will make the tail, this guy will make the fuselage, this guy will make the fuel tanks, and they all do it together. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking.
And making that sync up can be hard, especially if you don't let them do their jobs and you try and micromanage them.
Exactly. Well, I don't know if computers and CAD and all that stuff and what they're doing now helps now, but.
Well, the thing as well is that getting back to that, I mean, I know we're talking about a different book now, but getting back to that point, they were funneling money from the development of some Lockheed Martin project, a civilian aircraft or something else that was going way over budget, and that money was going to the F-117, it was going to the SR-71 and the A-12, the Project Oxcart and Archangel and all that sort of stuff. This is what I'm talking about. Lockheed, and everyone's thinking, oh man, Lockheed Martin, they're over budget again. I'm like, yeah. they're not just building an F-35, guys.
I mean, they're making. They could be doing something interesting with it, but there's definitely going to be an F-35 and a lot of planes coming out of it. I mean, it's definitely like been an expensive program.
I look at it like this. I look at the X-35 or the F-35 just like I look at the Boeing 787. When the Boeing 787 came out, everybody considered it a failure because it was burning up its ion lithium batteries. And now once they let Boeing, they grounded that plane actually, remember? And they worked the program, and now it's flying beautifully. Nobody ever heard nothing about it. And when you get on it, you never even think about those batteries burning out. And
yeah,
it's the same thing.
Yeah, the F-35's had a very long design life, probably because people didn't want to. They wanted to funnel it trickling over time instead of giving it all the money right away to get it done quick. And then design requirements have changed over time. They've wanted to add all. At first, it was just going to be one, but then they're like, okay, we need a VTOL version, and we need like an Air Force version or whatever. We need a Navy version, and it's been a completely evolving design where stuff has been getting changed a lot over time. A lot of money's been going down the tubes because they got to rework certain parts of the design. I mean, it's definitely been an expensive program. Probably a lot of it due to the fact that it's been like the first time designing such a plane where everyone's supposed to be using it or whatever.
But if you go back and look at this type of thing, this is just this year's F-35. I mean,
totally.
What was it? What weapon system probably wasn't almost developed? It was something. Los Angeles overran, and they were all pissed off or whatever. I know one of these programs overran, and
yeah,
a
slight cost overrun is one thing, but the F-35's budget is now 3.5, 4 times what it was originally forecast.
Oh, it's
yeah. I mean, I'm willing to consider factors like people not saying how much it's going to cost as perhaps not necessarily maliciously, but like it turned out to be a lot more expensive, and then like design requirements got completely changed, designs got completely overhauled. Like there were a lot of places for money to just go down the tubes because it went to something that's no longer being used, and they got to restart from scratch on certain parts.
Yeah.
Fucking Ticonderoga. That's another one that fucking they raged in Congress about, and they got cost overruns.
Yeah, people want their cake, and they want to eat it too when it comes to how expensive military programs are.
It's the same thing. It's this. You know what? That's why they name them after fucking states and senators and people now, because they try to fucking grease the palms and all that kind of stuff. I've heard this argument over time. You hear this everything. Los Angeles and anything that's going to cost money is going to be fucking M1A1.
Yeah, if you're going to have a massive expenditure, you need to spread it over a minimum of 20 states.
Yep, that too.
Yep. All right. I think we've been off topic for a good bit here, so I think now's a good place to end there and end the book club here. So.
Oh yeah.
Thanks for coming, everyone. It was definitely an amazing book that I really enjoyed. There's a lot of insight into what went down in the Cold War in this book.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm really enjoying it from an aspect of reading it. If somebody is thinking about reading it, I'm reading it now, and I strongly suggest getting the book. No doubt about it.
There's a lot of stuff we didn't even have time to touch on. Something I wanted to discuss was conventional depth charges versus nuclear depth charges. There was an interesting discussion about that in there.
I can't remember all of the discussion about that, but the bottom line is let me summarize that. Nuclear depth charge is bad.
The way I was reading it was a little, maybe not as bad. He was saying, he claimed that no one would use a nuclear depth charge against another ATACMS because the two people who would be engaging would be too close. He argued it would only be used against a ballistic missile submarine, and then he also had the. He also talked about the difference in like shockwave profile from like nuclear versus conventional, which I can draw up here, which I guess I've been kind of wanting to draw this whole time.
I was gonna say this is Chastity 101 right here. Go
on, do it. Ed, you've got YouTube editing capabilities, I'm sure.
I got what now?
You've got YouTube editing capabilities, I'm sure.
Oh yeah.
Don't you know he's YouTube famous?
All right, so he was saying for conventional depth charges, it has to be much closer to get a hit.
Well, compared to a nuclear, that makes perfect sense.
So, like, you're going to have a much more differential shockwave profile. Let me sit down and explain it. So you're going to have a much more differential shockwave profile. You're going to have, like, pressure spots along the hull. It's going to be much more, you know, a higher pressure concentration at any one point where this depth charge goes off.
Okay.
But with a nuclear depth charge,
What happened here? A little bit of lag.
There might be a slight lag in the feed, but I think you just literally ran off to start drawing.
the nuclear depth charge is probably going to be further away, so by the time the shockwave hits the boat, it's actually much more of like a linear shockwave, so you don't get that same pressure differential against the hull to necessarily do as much damage. So like, I guess to sum it up basically, is basically saying that the boat is more set up to withstand a nuclear type shockwave, assuming it's going to be coming from further than a close in, more differential pressure type of shockwave.
Looks like Bikini 46 to me.
Wow.
Let me I had the page noted down here. Let me try and read what he had written. Okay, here we go. So we're on page 105. We're in the second paragraph, about
I was just there.
We're about 5 lines in. Any effective assault on Polaris when she was running deep would most likely originate from a nuclear weapon launched from afar with a large radius of kill rather than from depth charges. A depth charge has to detonate close by to kill and exerts a localized pressure on part of the hull, a localized pressure that can break the back of the sub if the depth charge is close enough when it detonates. A missile sub is, of course, also vulnerable to attack from a hunter-killer sub, but okay, that doesn't matter. Moving on. The pressure wave from a nuclear anti-sub weapon is large compared with the dimensions of the sub. The stronger the hull, the less likely it is to fail when exposed to the uniform pressure of the sort that a nuclear detonation would produce. There is a trade-off here. A stronger hull means more weight, which in turn limits what you can put into your sub, reactor weight, ordnance, and so forth. If your reactor is limited, your speed is limited. Attack sub skippers don't want anything to cut their speed. They don't need the capability to operate as deep as the missile sub, which needs more hull strength. The missile sub can live with that trade-off since speed matters less to a missile sub than it does to an attack sub.
So,
okay, here, let me so moving on here. A submarine with a collapsed depth of 2,000 feet will be, in nuclear parlance, 1,000 pounds per square inch hard, a figure several times higher than the hardest missile silo and thus the least vulnerable of the nation's deterrence weapons. A Polaris sub-skipper is not worried about a localized pressure from a depth charge. He's not worried about speed, but an attack sub-skipper worries about depth charges, so he wants a stronger hull to withstand that localized pressure exerted when a depth charge detonates close in. It is unlikely that his adversary, another hunter-killer sub or an anti-sub surface ship, is going to use a nuclear device on him. I found that to be a very interesting passage, but I may have been the only one who was able to follow it.
no, exactly. But I'm not sure if I subscribe to that, though. I don't know. But I understand it. If you're going after considered a priority resource in a boomer, you're going to use everything you got, including up until a nuclear weapon. That seems feasible to me.
Well, one of the nice parts that I'm guessing Chasley in the interest of brevity missed out, but there's a paragraph there just after he talks about speed and depth, and he says, if you were to use really scarce, costly titanium for a hard, deep diving hull, and you were more concerned that the Russians would do just that, you'd get a much better weight, depth, and speed trade-off. So that's a fun point to remember. Like back then, you know where the best place to get a lot of titanium was back then? Soviets. The Soviets had a large quantity of titanium.
They're the leaders in metallurgy.
Yeah.
So an interesting note about titanium, it's actually a rather common element, but it comes in the form of like a white powder. Like if you have white paint, it's titanium. It's colored with titanium dioxide or oxide, whatever.
Yeah.
So extracting that titanium metal from its oxide state is a very expensive and not resource efficient process. So the Soviets decided to pull the trigger on that front.
Yeah, they've been the leaders. They work with the stuff. I mean, hell, they made a submarine out of it, right?
Yeah, that's what I was getting at. The submarines, the Soviets came to that conclusion. You want to go deep, you want to go fast, and you want to go, we're going to cut a submarine out of that. And what was the submarine they kitted out with it?
Alpha.
Boomers.
Alpha and Papa, right?
Papa, was it Mike too?
Those were trials, right? Those were proofs
Right.
of concepts. What was the first fleet of titanium vessels they put out? Boomer.
Alpha.
More than one vessel?
There was
Yeah.
Alpha and then
Alpha
Sierra.
and
Sierra. Yeah, Alpha had 6 boats, and then Sierra had 4 boats that were titanium as well.
I was more
But I
thinking
thought Papa.
of
I thought there was a Papa or a Mike. There was one.
Yeah,
one-off.
yeah. Those were both one-offs. Yeah.
Those
I
are the
think
only titanium boats I only know of.
And it was either the Mike or the Papa that sunk.
no, that's the
I think it's the
Komsomolets.
Mike.
Yeah.
Come some of yet.
The Mike. Yo, Mike.
Duh.
Yo, Mike. Yo, Mike.
Yeah, they made titanium submarines. We made a titanium plane.
Yeah, and we got the titanium probably from the same factory. That's a fun story
Wow.
as well. Yeah, no, that's fun. True story. The FSR-71, loads and loads of titanium. There were 200 shell companies set up. They bought all their titanium from the Soviets,
Yeah, they did.
which I find hilarious. I love it.
Some CIA businessmen to buy the titanium from them.
That's all right. Fucking half the planes that were probably used in Pearl Harbor got their metal from us.
Yeah, well,
Fucking assholes.
that's the way it goes.
It's the way it goes. Exactly. That's what I'm saying. That's the way it goes.
Well, alrighty. Okay. Thanks for coming, guys. This is a very good book to read. Very interesting book with a lot of good insights into the Cold War mentality and some of the batshit crazy schemes that went down.
Yeah, that's what I got out of it, is like just how crazy some of these people with so much money were able to throw into crazy projects that belong in a James Bond, out of a James Bond film or a James Bond book. Some of these are absolutely crazy.
Oh yeah,
and they
for sure.
happened. Yeah, it's like,
Yeah, they did happen. Always makes you think what we don't know about happened.
well, that was going to be my next point. Like, if this stuff we know about.
Any other closing thoughts?
Oh, yeah. For people, you just brought up a point here. For people that are, like as young as you who don't remember the Cold War and stuff, it'd be a fascinating read. I mean, I don't go back as far as him, but a lot of the stuff is like, oh yeah, yep, yeah, this is how it used to be, and hopefully we're not returning to that. Don't want to get too political here, but yeah, fascinating read, and I'm looking forward to finishing the book, and I'm sure I'll be discussing it with you further, Trasley.
For sure. Alrighty, guys. Well, thanks for coming, and I will see all of you later. And as always, good hunting.